Hey there, everybody. I am Jeff. This is Tabletop Toolbox, and I am holding it together for episode number 53 of the weekly Ratchet. Yes, I am a little bit under the weather, which means it is finally time for me to admit to you that I am your father.
Really?
No, not really. I can't back that up.
Listen, it's just going to be a weird one here on the weekly Ratchet. Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to the show. Yes, I know, I kind of look like shit, I sound like shit, and I'll be honest, I kind of feel like shit too. I think I'm somewhere between severe allergies and maybe something of a head cold. I just kind of had an itchy throat last week, just started getting very just kind of sneezely and congested over the weekend. I don't feel sick. I don't have the whole aching joints and, just want to just go to sleep all the time until yesterday. Yesterday, I finally had to just succumb and take a long nap. I'm feeling a little better. I would just be so happy if I could just breathe normally again. Maybe someday. Obviously, I was thinking I'll just skip the show this week, but here's the thing. I played a bunch of games in the past week. I also got a bunch of games in the past week because this past week was RiVirCon. That's the Richmond, Virginia convention here in the Richmond area, and it's always a pretty good event. Got to play some sort of new games and some older games, which I always love getting to do. And so I have a lot to talk about. Also, this week, I'm leaving for our cabin out in Shenandoah Wednesday evening. I'll be joined by my good friends Katie and Greg of the Meeple Society from Indianapolis, and my good buddy Daniel is actually coming from here in town to join us. We're going to have just a long weekend of getting to play a bunch of games and a comfortable 4-player count, and I'm looking forward to talking about all that stuff next week. So I thought, look, I've got to get through this list of games this week and clear the path for a bunch of games to chat about next week. So the show must go on despite all of this happening. With all that being said, let me go ahead and tell you about some new games. Okay, a couple of new things that have come in. First of all, I mentioned this one last week. I went ahead and got my own copy of Bark Avenue. This is from Terradice Games. We have not gotten to play this again, but even my daughter is looking forward to checking this game out again. Just a lovely, lovely theme to a fairly lightweight, kind of family weight game. Looking forward to checking this out. Also, I did realize that there was another Kickstarter for this with a couple expansions that has already ended. I did reach out to them to see if there's a way to late pledge. I've actually not heard back from them again, so I might bug them one more time, but I'm sure I'll at least be able to pick those up later on, seeing as even this deluxe edition came right off of their store. So that's Bark Avenue. I also did get one Kickstarter that came in this past week. This is Micro Moonshine from Thistroy Games in the UK. I have their other game, which I believe is Micro Galaxy or Microcosmos, which actually I got from the Dice Tower. I'd heard good things about it, especially as a solo game, but literally have never had a chance to play it. I just need to get these things out and try them out. I don't even really know why I back this, except for I love the theme. I love that kind of Prohibition era, booze running, all that kind of good stuff. So I'm looking forward to checking out Micro Moonshine someday. Hopefully I'll do that. All right, so at RiVirCon, they always have a little bit of a flea market of games. I picked up just a couple of things. I picked up Beyond the Sun. Yes, this is still in shrink. Brand new copy of Beyond the Sun. The first time I played this, I didn't really care for. I have since played it actually a number of times, including on Board Game Arena, and actually I did kind of end up enjoying it. It does have an area control element on this sort of sideboard that's just not my favorite part of the game. But once I started to realize where the strong plays are with this, I've actually done fairly well with it. And I do like it. I will not bother getting the expansion for this. I actually reviewed that out in the Dice Tower and was pretty kind of displeased with it. A very, very little amount of content for an awful lot of money. And this game itself is very expensive, but I actually managed to get it for a pretty good price. This is Beyond the Sun. Now, it's also kind of funny because I had heard that there was a new kind of a sequel coming out to Beyond the Sun. It's not an expansion. It's a new game from the same designer, and there was actually a copy there for sale. This is Beyond the Horizon. This is now from Capstone Games, not the same publisher, but like I said, the same designer. And this is a little bit more of a Civ game. So from what I understand, this is actually supposed to be a prequel to Beyond the Sun, in that here you're trying to sort of build up the civilization to leave Earth. I don't know why. I've barely even lifted the lid on this thing. But when I saw that it was there and I confirmed that it was the game I thought it was, I just went ahead and I grabbed it. So I'm looking forward to checking this one out. Now, I will say that the artwork and such in the back of the box looks pretty uninspired. We were also kind of looking at some of the contents and such. I mean, just these cards are very bland and kind of basic and boring. Now, granted, Beyond the Sun did not have the most busy artwork either, so maybe that's just kind of what the designer likes to go for. Not really sure. But anyways, look, it's a Civ game. I'm all about a Civ game and a little bit of a tech tree. Excuse me. So we'll see how that goes. And then lastly, this one's... I don't know why I got this. And this is not a small box. This is Cloudspire. And I brought in just the lid because this thing is heavy. Now, I got just the base game, but I didn't actually buy this. One of my good buddies here in town was trying to offload this. No one bought it. And I said, hey, let me just like borrow this. And he goes, well, fine, you can borrow it, but I don't want it back. So either you got to buy it later or we'll trade for it or something. And he was mostly kidding. But anyways, I want to try this out. I know that this is kind of a MOBA style game where it's kind of like it's tower defense, but you're moving armies to try and attack the opponent's towers while they're sending armies to you. And so you kind of get in these clashes in between those two ends of the map. And I don't know exactly how that translates to this game. I just understand that it kind of uses that MOBA idea. This is from Chip Theory Games, and I have never played a Chip Theory game. I know they're very, very, very popular. I know that their production value is very, very high. I know that there's a crap ton of dice and a crap ton of poker chips in the bottom half of this box. But I just don't know anything about it. I also know that there is a ton of content for this, which is one reason why I've just never gotten into it, because being a completionist like I am, I know that the last Kickstarter of this, I think, was something like $500 to get everything that they made for this game. And I was like, there's just no way that that's going to be worth it to me in the long run. So I did finally cave, and like I said, just kind of got the base version of this. And we'll see. I've heard it's very good at 1 or 2, so I'm gonna try and play this with my wife. Hopefully, I can help her wrap her head around it and maybe have a good time with it. We shall see. That is Cloudspire, and I think it's time for us to go ahead and get the question of the week. Still holding it together. I'm trying to keep these clips short. I'm holding it together. All right, last week I asked you to tell me your thoughts on games that use bidding to determine the turn order, understanding that there are kind of a wide variety of ways that games can do this. Up first was Wonderflonium, who said he likes the turn order bidding in the Great Zimbabwe, where the birds, I'm assuming he meant bids, are distributed to players rather than just returned to the supply. Now, I'm assuming he meant bids, but in board games, who knows? So my apologies if I'm miscorrecting you, but I'm assuming you meant bids. I think it's an unusual mechanic, this idea that, okay, you win the turn order and then the money that you spent is actually distributed to other players. That seems bonkers. And I would have to think that that is a double-edged sword, right? Because you get to be first player, but then you're literally just helping out your opponents. That seems odd. And I wonder how much does that kind of keep the bids down? People saying, oh, I don't want to spend that much. Of course, also I'd have to wonder if you're playing with 3 other players and you bid $1, like how does that work? Anyways, I'm going to try and get that game checked out maybe at the Dice Tower Retreat because I'm a little bit curious about it. Although now hearing that it has bidding for turn order, I don't know. Anyways, C.R. Pohl said that he'd be okay with bidding if the bidding was blind and you knew what you were bidding for. He gave an example using Azul, suggesting that if he knew of a tile he really wanted, he could bid for the chance to go first and get that tile. He added that bidding 0 should always be an option. And I agree with you on this one. Of course, Azul is not a game that has bidding on turn order, but I get where you're going with that. I think that most games that have bidding give you the option to kind of just blank out, like, hey, I don't really care. I don't care about my turn order, or I just don't want to spend any money. So that certainly makes sense. Simulation Chris said as long as he doesn't have to sell a kidney to afford to be the first player, he's not really against the mechanism. But that if he looks back at a lot of his recently played games, very few of them require bidding on turn order. And I understand that. A lot of the games that I play by choice don't have bidding really in any way. I'm not a fan of bidding in general, especially in these kind of closed economy games where there's only so much money. There's only so much way to get money. We're all kind of on equal footing, and yet I'm trying to outbid you for something, which just means that I'm weaker going into that next step, round, turn, whatever it may be, because I've just spent all my money on something. So yeah, just not my favorite mechanism in general. Mike Heller said that he thinks it's a good mechanism as it lets players change things up, but added that when he looks back at games he's played that use turn order bidding, he's rated many of those games with lower scores, implying that he's either not a really fan of the mechanism or just hasn't found the right one. And yeah, I think I'm in that same boat, although we'll circle back to that here in a little bit. Tetra said that he likes games that let you change up turn order, but doesn't prefer outright bidding as the method of doing so. He referenced the initiative system in Undaunted as a turn order method that feels agonizing but satisfying. And in Undaunted, you have these cards. It's not a deck building game. It's really kind of more of a deck and hand management game, but you've got these cards that are going to let you activate these various military units, but they also have an initiative value. And so at the beginning of your turn, at the beginning of a round of combat, you're sort of picking just one of these cards to trash to determine who's going to go first in that round. And at least in the one game that I've played, your very, very strong cards also have a high initiative value. So you can either discard that card to make sure you go first, but then you're sort of losing that powerful action to use in that round. And yes, it can be, it can be quite agonizing. So that's an interesting way of looking at it. Yukon Zach said that there are games, like worker placement games, where it's nice to be able to make yourself the first player. He also mentioned games where sometimes being last player has the advantage. He said a lot of these games will use an action of sorts to make this adjustment, but that bidding is okay if it's advantageous. And that kind of made me think of the game of Scoville. Scoville is one of the just wonkiest games, I think, that I have played, in that you're bidding on turn order. It's just a blind bid. I'm going to spend X number of dollars. But you're actually not bidding on turn order. You're bidding on the option to choose turn order. So you can pick if you want to go last or first or somewhere specifically in between. And that is because there are multiple phases in each round of that game. And in the one phase, you go first, and so you have first crack at the market. But then in the next phase, you go last, and that is when you're actually going around and sort of picking your peppers. And so if you're going last, you might get blocked out from spaces you want to go to. You might not be able to get the peppers that you want to get. But then in the last phase, you would go first, which is when you're actually fulfilling orders. And so there's this really, really, you want to talk about agonizing, Tetra. In Scoville, you go, okay, well, I really need a red pepper and a purple pepper to then fulfill this order. But if I want to guarantee that I get those peppers, I can't guarantee that that order will still be there when I'm finally fulfilling orders, because I'm going to go first to get the peppers that I want, but then last to fulfill any orders, or vice versa. And then you got to go, well, okay, if I make it so I can be sure that I get the order that I want, can I still make sure that I get the peppers I want if I'm the last person to do that in the round? And you're just sitting there just melting your face over this board trying to figure out, can I do everything that I want to do if I'm first player? And that is probably one of the most agonizing games I can think of in terms of turn order. But you're right. It's it's sometimes advantageous to go first, sometimes advantageous to go last. Ecto Fox said that bidding for turn order makes sense in some games more than others, mentioning 5 tribes where the system becomes crucial to making the big move before someone else does. In other games, it's just there and isn't really key to players' strategies. I can't think of any games that would let you bid on turn order that I've played that I never really could understand the reason for doing so. I'm sure there have been. I just can't think of any. I can't think of a game where turn order was something that you kind of fought for. There were actually actions that you could take to kind of make yourself become first player, and there was a ton of management between the rounds to figure out who the first player was, and I never saw any reason whatsoever to care as to when I went, and that game was Pampero. There was a big convoluted system to determine your turn order, and I never saw any advantage to going first or last. I'm sure it was there because the board could get a little crowded at times, but it still never felt like player turn order was really what was driving that that tightness, if that made any sense. Jeremy Brooks likened bidding on turn order to the game Trekking Through History, in which the amount of time between your turns is dictated by the action you choose on your turn, adding, "I actually really like this aspect of the game." That system is called a time track system, and there's a number of games that use it, and sometimes I've seen them handled in at least two different ways. I've played Trekking Through History, that game, and Search for Planet X by Ben Rossett, and Nova Luna by Uwe Rosenberg all sort of use that idea in that maybe you're taking something that, or you're doing something that is a little bit more powerful, and so that scooshes you up on this track. And if you take a lot of weaker actions or smaller actions, you can sort of stay behind everyone else, which means you just get to keep going, taking multiple actions until you pass another player, and then that player will get to go next, and so on and so forth. There's another sort of way that I've seen this done, the game Kraftwagen and the game of Glenmore, which actually has sort of a path of action tokens, usually in a loop, and you're just going to pick an available action. And so if you pick an action that's really far ahead, you're going to sit there while people behind you keep going, and they might just take this action and then the next one and the next one and the next one until they finally pass you. But they may be able to take 4, 5, 6 actions before you finally get to go again. And so you've got to kind of weigh the odds of, hey, do I go ahead and skip ahead and take this action so I know I get to take it? Or do I take an action earlier and hope that no one else takes it before I get to go again? And that's also quite nerve-wracking. I wouldn't really call it a bidding for turn order system, but I see how you kind of made that connection. Canuck Chuck simply said he's never played a game with turn order bidding. He didn't even know that was a thing. And I kept that answer for last in this list because as we've already kind of chatted about here, there's a bunch of different ways that games have handled this. I have seen the ones where you put money in your hand, you go, okay, here's how much, 1, 2, 3, and you all reveal, and whoever bids the highest amount of money gets to go first. Ties are usually broken in, either maintaining the current turn order between tied players or maybe swapping them, just kind of stir things up. I've seen the ones in viticulture is a great example. I think I talked about that last week. I also mentioned what sort of spawned this conversation was the City of Iron game, in that you sort of have this list, a track of options, and usually in reverse turn order from the previous round, sometimes in the same turn order from the previous round. Players can then pick where they want to sit on this track. And especially in viticulture, I think viticulture is one of the first ones that I saw this done, and that the lower that the later in turn order you volunteer to go, you'll usually then get a benefit right away at that point. You usually get it, as soon as you sort of pick your location. And in viticulture, it might be some money, it might be some extra cards. There's even a way in viticulture, if you pick the very, very last player location, the very, very last position in turn order, you actually get an extra worker. It is a worker placement game, and it gives you a bonus worker. Although I do believe in the last version, sort of the last iteration of that game, you then had to automatically become first player in the next round. So if you picked last place, getting arguably the best option of an extra worker, you then automatically knew that you were going to become first player in the next round, getting no benefit whatsoever. I've also seen some games, and City of Iron is one of them, where you've got that same decision to make. Okay, I absolutely want to be first player, and in fact, 5 Tribes that Jeff mentioned does this. Okay, I absolutely want to go first place, and that location has a cost. I have to pay a certain amount of money to guarantee that I'm first player. The difference between that and just a closed fist blind bidding system is that you do still have turn order preference in picking how you're going to go in the next turn. So if you get to go first in choosing turn order, you can then make sure that you get to go first in the turn order. Whereas with the blind bidding system, look, I need to go first, all in, right? Boom, here's all my money. Of course, then, again, you may not be able to actually afford the actions that you want to take in the next round. And so there's a real tough decision space to make there. The first game I ever played that had this was actually one of the first games we ever bought, and that was Archipelago. That was recommended by Shut Up and Sit Down, and I really loved the game. I have not played it in a long time, but I really did like the game, and it had bidding for turn order, and that was the first time my wife and I had ever seen this, having only played games like Ticket to Ride and Suburbia, where it was just, you just kind of go back and forth taking turns. And we didn't understand the value of it. We didn't like why do we even care? And so we actually just did a quick house rule that we said, well, we're just going to always alternate. We'll just won't worry about it. And after we played it a couple times, we started to play other games. We got bigger into gaming. Then it started to make sense. And there's a sort of a semi-co-op nature of that game where you're trying to pay resources to the Queen of England, and whoever's first player gets to kind of pick where those resources come from. They can kind of drain the market to pay those bills. They don't have to use any of their own resources, forcing everyone else at the table to use their own personal resources or lose a bunch of workers for that round. There's also a market of cards that you're buying throughout that game. And again, just getting first crack at some of those cards might be worth going earlier in turn order. And it was funny because once we started to kind of realize it, making that shift to sort of going back to the base rules of the game, my wife didn't want to do it. She's like, well, no, we've just always alternated. Let's just keep doing it the way we're doing it. And I'm like, yeah, but now there is a legitimate reason to bidding on turn order and, sort of being a little bit more competitively minded in that instance. I was like, but I get it now. We should play it. So that was kind of tricky. I will say that, like some of the other comments here, it is not my favorite way to play games. I don't love bidding in general. There are some bidding games I've had a lot of fun with, Modern Art being one of them. We also did a little bit of a bidding system over this weekend I'll tell you about here in a moment. But it's just not my favorite way to play. My favorite games are games where you're the first player of the game. We're just going to keep going around and around and around and around. And then the only reason that person still has that first player token is that we keep track of who's going to be the last player to activate before the game is over. And everyone gets an equal number of turns. Because on your turn, you always have an equal number of options. Card stacks are refreshed and nothing really changes from round to round that you go, okay, I need to make sure that I'm first. Because it just doesn't matter. Those are definitely a preferred system to me over bidding for turn order, but I have certainly over the years kind of come to understand the value of games that use that system. Anyways, that is it for Question of the Week. Now I got to tell you about some recently played games. All right, as I mentioned, RiVirCon was this past weekend, and I got to play a number of games. I also played a couple games with my family in the past week, and I do have one big one that I'm going to save for the end of this list. Now, first of all, I'm going to mention some of the games that we've already played before that you've already heard about here in the channel, and I'll gloss through these kind of quickly. Up first, we played Critter Kitchen. My wife and daughter and I broke this one out again, and this time I added in a bunch of the additional expansion content. I added in the a la carte expansion, which adds little carts to the bottom of some of the various locations that you're sending your chefs to collect these ingredients. And we had a lot of fun with this, although I'll tell you that when you start to put all that stuff in, when you put the expansion stuff in, there's this more monkey little component that I think just came with the deluxe edition, an extra little meeple that you can kind of grab as you're playing the game, and it gives you an extra chance to get some extra resources. And that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to play with the mode of this game that felt to me like it would give you the most flexibility, that you'd be able to collect the most ingredients and hopefully make the game just a little bit easier for you by having a little bit more decision space to work with, if that makes sense. But it became quite a bit fiddly. In between rounds, when you're kind of restocking all this stuff, we had a lot of extra stuff to manage. And I was also, and it sounds silly, and I was even thinking maybe this needs to be a question of the week going forward at some point. I played this upside down. So I sat at the head of the table, at the top of the table. Wife and daughter were facing the board. I was upside down. And so trying to sort of remember where things go and things that were kind of further away from me sort of fell off my radar, if you will. And it was an awful lot to manage. The other thing I'll say with this, I like the game. I've really been enjoying the game. But I do sort of feel like it's a little skewed in the balance of the stuff that you're doing. So you play 7 rounds of this. The first 6 rounds, you're just trying to get these challenge meals out. But you're also trying to sort of stockpile ingredients for the big finale where you've actually got to feed this critic. And in those challenge rounds, of which there's only 2, you might get 4, 5, 6. I mean, you can get all the way up to 12 points or stars. But most of the time we were getting 5, 6, maybe 8, something like that, stars. And then suddenly in the end, in that 7th round, and when that critic shows up, I picked up something like 30 stars in that last round. And to the point that I absolutely obliterated my wife and daughter in score because I was playing the whole game, getting ready for that last round. I was stockpiling stuff. I was making sure that I had just the right tokens. I also got to see all of the rumors, which have a significant impact on in-game scoring. I got to see all of them. I was prepared for all of them, and just amassed a ton of points. And even as it was, like, my wife and daughter revealed their scores, and they said, "We don't even want to know yours, Dad. We don't even care." And my daughter went off to go get her shower, get ready for bed, and my wife says, "Well, what was your score?" So I had 41 points. They had like 23, 26, something like that. And she goes, "Oh, yeah, I'm glad you didn't tell her that. She probably would have been upset." And I'm like, "Yeah, I get it, but I had no idea how well you guys are doing. I don't get to see, all your ingredients are tucked behind a screen. I'm just playing the game at this point. I'm interacting with you guys. You're in my way. You're taking stuff I needed, blah, 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 whatever. But I don't know what you're doing. I don't know how well you're doing. I'm not able to track your score. There's not a scoreboard in the game to know how things are going. So I just need to play my best game, and we're only going to find out at the very end how things shook out." And so, yeah, if I knew that I was just clobbering them, maybe I would have pulled back just a little bit. Maybe not tried to, have such a high score and maybe fluster my daughter. And it's not a problem with the game at all. To call that an issue with the game would be incorrect. It's just sort of the way that it plays out. And if you're playing this because it looks like a family game, it's mostly family weight in its complexity. If you've got someone in the family who's a stronger gamer than others, it could kind of become a little lopsided in that final scoring. So just something to kind of consider there with Critter Kitchen. Up next, we played at RiVirCon another game of Ostia. Now, I have here the Pirates expansion because I finally got to play with the Pirates expansion. I was joined by a couple buddies there at the table and one gentleman who I've played with before, but it's been a while. I don't see him all that often. And he was really curious to check out Ostia. Now, I know the base game of Ostia pretty well, but this is the first time I broke out the Pirates expansion, and I was surprised at how much this added to the game and how much it really increased the complexity and added a little bit to the decision space. But one of the core, it's a modular expansion, but you really can't play with just some of the modules. I do believe you have to kind of go all or nothing with this expansion. This adds these little ships to various ports that you're sort of traveling to, and you have to have the weapons to get past these pirate ships. You never get to destroy them. They're always there. But when you get to these locations, you have to have either weapons, which you spend, or you have to have legions, which act as weapons that you get to keep. They're harder to get, of course, but they can also add some scoring to you at the end game. And this made the game, I think, a lot more finicky and a lot more procedural than I really cared for. Because, okay, well, I want to get down to that location, but first I've got to get some more weapons. And to do that, I got to trigger off this trading action. I have to have the gold first. And so you're going to spend a couple of extra turns just to be able to get your ship to where you want it to go. And moving the ships are important because you can't get out more ships until your previous ship has left the coastal regions, whatever. And so, like I said, it added a significant amount of overhead to this. It made the game more thinky, which wasn't a problem, but it made the game just a little bit more stressful and a little more lengthy, if nothing else, just because I need to get this stuff done before I can just go here and get something else done that I wanted to do. So I didn't dislike it, but I also didn't really love it. I also did not have a great game in this, maybe just because I was kind of, policing everyone in this game. I had a relatively low score of this, but still had a great time with it. I would love to check this out. I think this is a game that I need to play solo because you don't have any AI to manage. You just kind of have an action limit. You have a sort of a round counter, and once you get down to the bottom of this, the game is ending. And hopefully you've amassed enough points to win at the end of the game. Anyways, that is Ostia with the Pirates expansion. All right, I got to wake the computer back up here again because a lot of these next games I'm going to chat about, I don't actually have copies of. The first one I got to play at RiVirCon was the brand new Finspan. This is a wingspan game using fish and sort of the ocean as your environment that you're playing in. I was really surprised by this in really how much I didn't care for it. This takes that sort of wingspan formula, which I think was was made a little beefier with Wormspan and goes the completely opposite direction. This boils Wingspan down into some just absolute basic steps and mechanisms to the point that I found it boring, just very boring. In Wingspan and Wormspan, to get these cards out, which of course in this game are just fish, you had to have food or meat or eggs or whatever. You had to have a bunch of different resources. Some of the dragons in Wormspan, you even had to basically spend action tokens to get out. They were very, very, high scoring or unique dragons that were then very expensive to get played, but of course would be very strong for you. And if you could, work around those requirements, then you were going to do fine. In Finspan, you had eggs, you had young. This was the first game where you actually hatched your eggs. But unlike the previous iterations, you didn't have nice little colorful wooden eggs. It was just a tile. And it was actually a very just basic looking cardboard component. But you would flip it over and it would kind of give you a little baby fish icon. And so when you wanted to play out a fish, you may have to spend some of your eggs, you may have to actually spend some of your young, or you were just discarding cards from your hand. So I had a number of fish that just required you to discard 3 extra cards from your hand. And I've talked about that before here in the channel, that I just don't really care for that mechanism. That is the one aspect of a game that makes me have analysis paralysis, because I'm sitting there trying to weigh the value of all the cards I have, which ones can I afford to get rid of to play out this one? Am I getting rid of too much value to get one card played? And it's one thing that kind of slows me down in these games. But then on top of that, because those are the only resources that you had, and on your turn, you're basically either just playing out a card, spending the resources, or you go diving in one of 3 columns on your board, and you potentially trigger all the fish that you kind of visit on your way down to the depths of the ocean, which is fine. It's very much like Wingspan and Wormspan, except for that very, very few of the cards I even got let me do anything interesting when I visited them. So a lot of them were just when you play effect. I only had a couple of end game fish that did anything. And so it was just a very repetitive, like, well, I guess I'll play this card. I guess I'll play this card. Okay, I'm going to go diving so I can get more cards, and then I'll play this card. And it just felt very repetitive. It didn't really feel like there was any major strategies to try and work within. You're still able to tuck cards under other cards. This is actually the first game too where there are a couple of fish pre-printed on your board, and they're supposed to kind of help jumpstart some of your ecosystem. We did miss a couple things in the rules where you could, unlike in Wingspan and Wormspan where you have to have a card that allows you to tuck a card, you could just choose at any time to tuck a card or play one of your fish over top of a pre-printed fish on the board, which would give you scoring. And I missed that in the rules teach, and so kind of had a little bit of a lower score at the end than I could have had I understood that. We also didn't get to completely finish the game. One problem I have with RiVirCon still is that they sort of have these timed events. Okay, we're going to start this game at 7 o'clock. We're going to start this game at 5 o'clock. And sometimes people say, well, I'm going to try and squeeze in the game before my time slot. And we had 2 people at our table who were set up for a 5 o'clock time. We started playing at 4:15. I should have known we weren't going to get done in time. And so they forced us to end the game early. And that's unfortunate because everyone doesn't get to finish that game just because of 2 players at the table who have to run off and go do something else. It's a little bit of an annoyance. But on the same token, I wasn't really eager to finish the game. I was kind of glad that we could be done with it a little bit early. For one thing, my board was almost full. So I don't know. I overall was pretty disappointed with Finspan. For me, Wingspan was okay. I never thought it was the great game that everyone made it out to be. Wormspan I've always enjoyed because it felt like it made it a bit more strategic and thinky. It uses some systems that I really enjoy in games. And Finspan, like I said, just a completely opposite direction. No real joy in playing this thing. It looks lackluster. It doesn't have any of the flair of the Wingspan games. I'm already seeing where people are trying to make deluxe components to try and pretty up the game, but there's no game there, I think, to really make it worth it. So that was Finspan. Up next that evening, we played Trailblazer, the Arizona Trail. I've always been a little confused on the Trailblazer thing because there are a ton of these Trailblazer games, and they're all very different. This was one that I had not actually seen before. I thought we were going to play the John Muir Trailblazer game, but we weren't. And so I didn't really know what I was getting into on this. And this game, and I'm going to try to just kind of skim over this one because this game was weird. It wasn't bad in any way, shape, or form, but there's a ton of stuff going on in this game. It's a worker placement game. I played a lot of worker placement games this week where you are going and you're collecting polyomino tiles, you're collecting cards, you're collecting resources to then let you spend to put down these polyomino tiles. You've got these like location sort of cards that you're purchasing, just a lot of different stuff you're trying to do, and all of course in a way of amassing points. But also there's this aspect, I guess, in that you're trying to like toughen yourself up, and I can't remember what the resource was called, guile or something like that, in that you were collecting points, but you're also trying to like decrease your ineptitude, for lack of a better word. And just like a game that's quite popular, Ark Nova, you want to try and cross these things before the game ends. You want to make sure that you've gotten enough score and you've sort of reduced your stupidity, whatever, low enough so that at the end of the game you subtract your guile from your score, and that's from your gold, and that is your score. And so we played this game for, 3.5 hours, and 2 players finished with negative score. I won the game with 6 points, and the other lady at the table had like 3 points or 4 points or something like that. So very, very tight game, but you sit there and you're just busting your butt this whole game, trying to get all these resources, trying to kind of manage all this different stuff to get 6 points at the end of the game. And I don't know, it just, it was neat. It was a very colorful board. It was very, very busy. I didn't really get any of that actual Arizona type theme. Like there's these different animal cards and all that just kind of ends up being a set collection at the end. There's all these really pretty scenery cards, but they just kind of bump you up these tracks, which only provide a little bit of scoring maybe at the end of the game. The polyomino thing was kind of nice, except for that you're doing all of it just to fill the board to get 5 gold or points at the end. And so, I don't know, like it wasn't bad, but I can't say I have any compelling reason to play this thing again. It was a neat experience. Doesn't really do anything we haven't seen before. It steals the scoring system straight from Ark Nova. Why is this a game? But that was Trailblazer, the Arizona Trail. Up next we played, and this was Saturday now, we played Kraftwagen. This is the new version. I mentioned getting this a couple of episodes ago, where it uses the Kraftwagen gameplay, but sort of sets it in America instead of Europe. And in this game, you are running a car company. You're trying to research better car bodies and research better engines. And then eventually you're going to put a car body and an engine together and put that car out on the market with a couple of workers who are kind of there to represent the reliability of that car. You're setting a price for that car, and then you're also trying to attract buyers to buy that car. And there are 4 different types of buyers that you can attract. There's one who wants the best looking body, who wants the best engine, who wants the most reliability or the number of workers you've put on that car, and then one who just wants to pay the cheapest price. But you may put out the best car body, but if that buyer doesn't show up to the table, you may not be able to sell it. And then there's also sort of a track in the corner. You're kind of racing your car around the track, back in the 50s and such, when Ford was really big. Ford was kind of up and coming, this big car manufacturer, but they also had a racing team, right? That was a whole sort of Ford versus Ferrari thing from back in that time frame. And it was, just a big deal that you were selling cars, but then you were also going out and racing cars, and it was those races that kind of a lot of times drew in your customer base because I want the car that won Le Mans, right? So it's a neat aspect of the game. And this uses a time track system. This is one where you've got this kind of wheel of actions, and you're sort of trying to take the action that you really want, but you may not want to jump too far ahead. So maybe you're going to wait, hey, I'll catch that action the next time around if I can. And it makes it very thinky and a little stressful and agonizing. But the thing is that I have the original sort of European-based version of this game, and I've only played it a couple times. And I really remember it being a lot more cunning than this version was. Now, maybe I need to go back and replay that one. But I felt like there was a lot more opportunity to kind of manipulate the market. You may have the best car body out there and the buyer who wants the best car body, but maybe there's a way that you can kind of trick that person into buying something else. At least that's what I remember from that previous version. This game felt a lot more on the rails. Okay, I put out a 7 car body. I made sure the car body buyer was out there, and I sold that guy that car, no problem. The other thing that was kind of interesting was that my buddy Matt joined us to play this, and he, maybe intentionally, built the shittiest cars. He never got his research up above like level 2. He was making very boring cars, very, very slow cars. He was putting out all of his workers. He basically focused on the racetrack and getting all of his workers out, sort of unlocked onto his player board. And so he a couple times sold a car with just a ton of workers on it, really, really high price. No one else was going to buy that car, but it was super, super reliable, and so he had the right buyer out there. But then he also made a ton of points off the racetrack and ended up winning this game. Now, he only beat me by like 3 points. I was working a lot more the market aspect of it. But as Matt often does, he sort of saw, I think, the puzzle of this game and thought, I'm just going to work this racetrack to death. And he made there was even a round where he did not sell any cars. And he did fall back a little bit in placement score-wise in that round, but still came back to win in the end. So anyways, I didn't really enjoy this as much as I thought I was going to. This game didn't remind me as well of the European version. And like I said, maybe I'm just remembering that other game in a different way than it really played, but it's still a fun game. Actually, I also played it very, very quickly with 4 players, but it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. That was Kraftwagen. All right, 2 more games to talk about. So this one is a 2012 game. I was invited, the last game I played on Saturday at RiVirCon was Yido. This is a worker placement game, and I could really talk about this for a long time. I'm going to try and make sure I don't. But it was described to me as Lords of Waterdeep, but in a sort of a, Japanese ninja type theme. Now, I've never played Lords of Waterdeep. I do still want to check that game out. But I thought, sure, I'll play that, no problem. And then about 3 rounds into this game, I absolutely hated it. And I'll tell you why. This is a worker placement game. Now, I love worker placement games. And in this game, you're getting a couple of mission cards. And the missions may say, okay, you have to have a person in this location on the board, which is kind of a city. And you have to be at the market. And you have to have a ninja throwing star. And maybe you have to have a geisha. And then if you get all that done and that worker does the mission, then you're going to get $10. But if you also have maybe this location that you kind of unlocked or purchased on your player board, and maybe you have a certain token, you get an extra $5. And so you're doing all this to get money. But very little of it actually gives you points. So there's other ways you're trying to go and get points, but one of the biggest ways to get points is simply go to a location on the board. I can't remember the names of all the locations. Actually, I'm not sure if I can remember the names of any of the locations. And you can trade in a bunch of money to just buy a couple of points. And all that's still okay, right? So my first round or so, okay, I had a card. I think I could work on this. And I went to like the temple and I got a blessing token. And I went and I bought this one location. And okay, then I got my person on that board. All right, perfect. I get 2 points and I get a bunch of money. Oh, awesome. All right, mission accomplished. I'm in the lead. I had 6 points and we played a 5-player game, so 2 players had 5 points and 2 players had 4 points. I was in the lead with 6 points. And then there's an event deck. In the beginning of the next round, someone flipped over the top card of the event deck and says, okay, the player with the lowest amount of points gets 2 points, and the second lowest scores get 1 point, and that's it. And all of a sudden, we all had 6 points. So I had just busted all my butt, getting all my people in the right place, and getting 2 points, only for a simple event card to get randomly drawn and completely lose my lead. Now, it was 2 points, not that big of a deal, but it just felt so insulting to, I've worked to get to this, and you guys just had a card flip and completely negated my progress. Okay, fine, whatever. Next round, I got a weapon I needed, and I'm starting working on my next mission. I need to get this weapon. I actually went and I traded for it. I get the weapon out, boom, I got the weapon. Now I'm working on my next mission. Next event comes out, there's a fire, and you must voluntarily get rid of one of your weapons. Just have to, get rid of your weapon. Great. I worked my ass off for this. I spent an entire round getting this thing, and a fire just comes and wipes away again because of a random card flip. Now I'm starting to get upset. Okay, next round. I get that mission done. I managed to get the weapon back, whatever it was I was trying to do. Get that mission finished, made a couple of bucks. Didn't have as much money as I had kind of wanted to have at that point, but I was trying to, keep some money in the bank because there is this kind of a bidding system. You can get more workers, you can get geishas, you can buy these rooms. I had some endgame goals I was trying to be mindful of at the same time. You need to have a lot of cash in this game, trying to kind of work on multiple fronts all at the same time. And I'm fine with all that. Next event card comes out, all players lose half of their money rounded down. Just, well, okay, cool. I worked for all this money, got that mission done, it all just goes away. And I said, that's it. I absolutely hate this game. This game is a pile of shit. I don't care if I ever play this thing again. Event decks must die, especially those kinds of decks where it just completely obliterates everybody. I mean, to be fair, but when you're working on these objectives, and something just so callous, like just wiping away half of your money, or just getting rid of something that you've spent an action and money and trying to win a bid and all this stuff to get, and then the game just says, nah, now you just lose it. Why? Because we felt like putting that in the game. Garbage. I liked the game. I liked this idea of, okay, I'm trying to get these missions. I like sort of, okay, I've got these like sort of secret objectives, and oh, hey, I'm going to trade you for that. Let me get that sword up off of you, and okay, I need to get this person here. And this also had a game or a mechanism where you can bump yourself to the first in turn order because a lot of these locations are limited in how many players can actually go there. And so sometimes I had to be first in turn order so I can get to that location before it filled up. Except for that, again, it wastes an entire action. You got to put a worker there. I only had 2 workers for most of the game. I didn't play that part of it very well. And so it felt really frustrating to spend half of my entire round just to make sure I could be first player in the next round. And then usually by the end of that round, I was back down to third or fourth, place in turn order. And it was just so frustrating. Anyways, that was Yito. As always, I say, hey, I'm glad I got to try this out. I think if I were to play this game again, I'd be like, let's just get rid of that action deck. Let's just pretend that's not here. Because I think that alone was what made the game just not fun. Just that complete, utter randomness of having shit taken from you for no reason whatsoever other than just, let's make the game harder. Unnecessary. All right, there is one more game to chat about. I'm going to try not ramble on too long about Galactic Cruise. This is from TK King. This is published by Kinson Key Games. This thing looks, feels, and smells, well, not that I can smell, but it smells like a Vital Lacerda game. Just everything about this just reeks of Vital Lacerda, including the art and graphic design from Ian O'Toole. We got to play this last week with some buddies, including my good friend Daniel here in town. Now, I will say right off the get-go that we played it wrong. There was one sort of key rule that I missed. Now, I think it sort of affected all of us equally, so I don't think it skewed the game in any particular player's favor. However, it made the game much longer than it needed to be, and I'll say this, I actually led in score for most of this game, and only in the last couple of rounds did I finally get past, and quite well, actually. That by the time the game ended, I was a distant second place, but still second place by a pretty decent margin. And I think that if we had played the proper game length, I probably could have kept my momentum long enough that I probably would have come out in the lead. And that's not a big deal. First game like this, a lot of learning curve, a lot of just trying to figure the game out. Now, in this game, you're trying to compete to be the CEO of a company that is sending people on cruises in space, right? This is kind of everything that SpaceX alleges to want to be, right? But what's weird is that you're sort of competing to become the next CEO by doing all the stuff that no CEO would ever do. You're running the business. I mean, you are literally putting the rockets together. You're trying to get the launch schedule set up. You're trying to advertise the upcoming cruise. You're trying to get customers lined up. You're trying to get the resources you need to be able to make the next launch. Stuff that a CEO is not going to do because they're too busy sort of hobnobbing on the grand scale of the overall business, right? They're looking for the investors. They're out meeting people. They're not going to be involved in the day-to-day operations of a company like this anyways. But okay, fine, whatever, I digress. The other thing I thought was kind of weird about this is that money is incredibly hard to come by in this game, at least in our version of this. And I'll get back to that in just a second. But I'm building this presumably multi-million, if not billion-dollar rocket. I'm selling tickets to two people, but I'm sure that kind of represents maybe a group of people, whatever. And I put them on this rocket, and I send them up into space, and I take them to all these locations, and I get $2, $2 at the end of that mission, or even before that launch actually happens. You get like $2 when you sell the tickets. And it's like, really? I mean, is that... Like, this has got to be a far more profitable business than that. So I thought that bit was kind of weird. Other than that, I did really enjoy this game. Now, it doesn't have the combo-tastic kind of stuff that you're used to seeing out of a Vital Lacerda game, because it's not a Vital Lacerda game, even though it looks like one. There's not a lot of that, okay, I do this, and that moves me up on this track, and that lets me get this done. That doesn't really happen. There also isn't the executive action that he does in a lot of his games where, okay, I'm getting ready to make this play, but if I spend this and I take this extra little bonus action, that sets me up for an even bigger, main action. There's none of that in here. But there are these agenda cards. And the agenda cards, you can either just spend them to get a resource, or you can spend them as part of an action to sort of bolster that action. And so, for example, I had a card that said, okay, when you're adding these modules to the rocket, you can build them for reduced cost. And then I had one that I think said that I could build directly off of the market and not pay the excess cost, something like that. And I actually managed to use two of those cards together in a single turn to build a bunch of modules all at once. Basically got a ton of stuff done in just a single turn. So it still had that feeling of like the combos or the executive actions. It just kind of goes about it in a different way. And all that was fine. The game was long, but obviously it was longer than it needed to be. The components are top notch. The puzzle is really intricate, and trying to figure out really what's the best way for me to go about getting this stuff done is kind of interesting. Again, the tightness of the economy didn't quite feel thematic. And I've played games like this before, right? Even Distilled is a great example of a game where there's a very, very successful business. That is an industry that does very, very well. And yet in that game, you're just constantly broke. And you're like, why is it so hard to make money in an industry that is a very profitable industry? It's complexity just for the sake of being complex. And I felt a little bit of that in here. Now, there are these, when you go into cruise, your different customer types are going to give you rewards based on a random setup. And so, for example, in our game, we had the family customers would give you reputation. The adventurous customers were giving us, I think, resources. And the relaxing customers, I can't remember what they were giving us. It wasn't money, so I can't remember what it was. But those tiles change out from play to play. So you could have gotten the tile out, you could have gotten a customer type that for the entire game would give you money. And so if you loaded a rocket up with that particular type of customer and sent them on a location where they just went to space a couple of times, you were going to make a crap ton of money. And so it feels a little weird in that, where you can have a game where you're just completely flush with cash and everything else, or something else is harder than other games. Because we didn't have that benefit token out, we struggled for money in this game. And so I do kind of wonder how that might feel in other playthroughs of this. Just by changing out that benefit of those customers could make this feel like a very, very different game. We also play with the default setup where the actions are pre-printed on the board. And I can certainly see that if you randomize those locations, or those action locations, which is the normal way of playing, you could also make this game a good bit harder, because, for example, one of the actions is going and sort of picking the cruise that you want to launch. And once you do that, it's locked out. No one else can take it. But then the sort of next action in that location is advertising for a cruise. And because they were grouped, you could do both of those actions in the same turn. So I could go ahead and pick my cruise and go ahead and advertise for that cruise, locking in my first two customers and setting myself up for a perfect launch, if you will. But I could see that if those locations were spread apart and you couldn't trigger them at the same time, that could make that far more stressful and worrying, because, I'm going to go ahead and book that cruise, but I can't sell it until I take this action later, and maybe in the next couple of turns, someone goes there and they take the customers that I wanted, that I had just the right resources for, and that could set me back a couple of turns to sort of adjust to that. Could really be stressful. So in general, and I know a lot of people were curious to hear about this, I think it's a pretty good game. I did enjoy the puzzle of it. Like I said, I was focusing on points. And so I had a benefit. You get this, what's it called? It's a funding action. And every time your workers kind of come back to your board, every once in a while you got to just say, okay, everyone come home for a meeting. And you call all your workers back. And every worker that comes back to your board triggers a funding action. And there's a bunch of different stuff that you can do, and it actually gets better throughout the game potentially. And I just kept getting points. Okay, you give me 2 points, you give me 2 points, and I'll use to get a fuel, because I need a fuel. And so I just kept doing that. So I was getting really far ahead on the board, but I wasn't really getting a lot of great launches in. I was getting missions run, I was getting cruises done, but I wasn't getting a ton off of those cruises. Now, my buddy Mike, who played this, had a very, very unique approach. That he only ever built one rocket. It wasn't until the very end that he built one other one, which he never even used. He also used a couple of these agenda cards to build a oversized, extremely large, powerful rocket with a ton of different modules in it. He can host a wide variety of customers and get a lot done with a single launch. And that was it. He put everything into that one rocket. It meant he didn't have to spend a whole lot of money on building multiple rockets like Daniel and I did. And he just kept milking that one rocket. And towards the end, he was getting 30 points for a single launch, because of how he had this stuff set up. And so Daniel and I were kind of struggling to keep up. But because of what we were doing, we had a lot higher endgame score because we had multiple rockets. Each rocket itself scores. Anyways, there's a lot going on in it. And so it was kind of interesting to see how you could take different approaches to trying to score in this game. Now, it ultimately did not work for Mike that he did that, but was still kind of, he was in the running for sure. He was just a couple of points behind me. Had things gone a little differently, he probably could have pulled it off. But again, we were playing a much longer game than we were supposed to. I think we each got 6 or 7 launches. And from what I came to understand, 3 to 4 is maybe the max that you might get to do. So that would have cost him a ton of points at the end, and like I said, may have resulted in a different winner. Anyways, I think we'll be playing this at Cabin Con next week, so I'm looking forward to diving into this a bit more. I also want to try this out solo. I really do, but the solo rules are 8 pages just for the solo play. So I might watch a video first and see if that kind of helps me to understand it. Anyways, neat game, Galactic Cruise. I talked too much about that, and I apologize. Okay, real quick, question for next week. I want to know, what is your favorite gaming accessory? What is something that you use? Not a gaming component, not something for a specific game, but something that you use in your gaming experiences with your friends or family, whatever, that maybe just improves or streamlines gaming in general for you and your friends or family. That's what I'd love to chat about next week. And other than that, I hope that I'll be on the mend and feeling great for next week. I'm hoping I will not be sick for Cabin Con. This needs to go away quickly. But other than that, folks, I'll catch you next week. Thanks for watching. Cheers.